Hey, this is Gerd Handel, and welcome to the Inner Light Project. This show is for anyone who's wanting to lead a happier, healthier, and enlightened life. Create more self-love, inject more joy and abundance into their daily life. Join me for inspiring interviews and spiritual topics so you can shine your inner light. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Inner Light Project. My name is Gerd Handel, and today I want to share with you someone who's helping people to heal from grief after leaving controlling environments. And I think this topic is so important. A lot of women end up in toxic, abusive relationships. And that not only just stems in their life, it stems also through generational patterns that have been handed down from mum to grandmother and so forth. And it's only been about 60 years or 70 years since women have had their own bank accounts. So we really as a society have progressed in many ways, but still there's a lot of work that needs to be done on healing relationship wounds and toxic environments. And so I'm so excited to have this person on the show. She's amazing at what she does. Lyn Smith Gregory is a family estrangement expert who helps individuals cope with psychological trauma after leaving high control groups. She teaches them how to reconstruct their personal autonomy, build relationships, and develop ties with new communities. Hi Lyn, I'm so grateful to have you on the show, and thank you for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, bless you. No, thank you for being on the show, because we've just been having a conversation beforehand, and it's so interesting, your journey and what you've been through and how it relates to so many women out there, whether they've been in a cult or not.
Yes, I think there's some real commonalities that occur in high demand, high control religions or cults, particularly with the issues around women in cults.
Yeah. So could you tell us what your life was like before you moved to New York?
Well, I was a curious but still very devoted believer in my Mormon faith and my family heritage. I don't know if your listeners are aware, but I am the great grandniece of Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormon Church. And so it was part of my heritage, and Mormons revere blood lineage, and we were treated like royalty in the community and in the church because of our connection to Joseph Smith. And that created an additional layer of pressure to be perfect, to be a high performer. Our family was visible and held up as an example for others to emulate. So I felt the most important thing for me to do was never bring shame to my family. And I had no intention of leaving the church, and it happened really quite by accident. I had been excited about going away to university, so excited that I graduated a year early from high school.
Wow.
And I thought, when I'm at university, I will get the answers to some of the questions about life that bothered me, that I didn't feel that the Mormon Church had satisfactorily answered for me. And they kind of put me off with, it's not important for you to know that right now, or that's not what we're discussing today, or you'll find out when you're older. And so I graduated a year early, but I missed the deadline for my university of choice, which was BYU. And that is kind of the Harvard of Mormon schools, where all Mormon kids want to go. And I missed the deadline for application for admission. And so I went to another state school planning on transferring after the first year. Mm-hmm. But I met a professor who taught my creative writing class, and I discovered he was an atheist. And that shocked me because I adored him. He was witty and sarcastic and so funny. And he found out who I was. And he challenged me to take his religion class the next semester. And he said, I'll expect you to defend your faith.
Wow.
And I thought, well, that's not a problem. I know everything there is to know about Mormons. It's part of my heritage, it's part of who I am. And so, but I knew he had read widely about the Mormons. And so I decided I better read everything I could, even books that had been forbidden to read as a Mormon. There were certain books that I was warned against, and I was told, don't read these books. They're by, they've been influenced by Satan, and they're just trying to ruin your testimony of the one true faith. But I read them, and they were objective accounts by historians and scholars about the Mormon movement and Joseph Smith and my great-great-grandfather Samuel Smith. And I discovered, much to my shock and dismay, that these historians painted a very different picture of the early Mormon Church, and particularly Joseph Smith, that was not flattering, and definitely not the narrative I had learned in church and from my parents. And yet the narrative they spelled out with signed affidavits, newspaper accounts, journal entries, etc., was very compelling and very convincing that Joseph Smith was a fraud, that the Book of Mormon was based on a book he had read that was very similar to the story he spun in the Book of Mormon. And he was also a predatory womanizer, and married in a very short period of time, between 30 and 40 women, some as young as 14 years old. And I didn't even know Joseph Smith was a polygamist. The Mormon Church had not admitted that at that point. And I was shocked, shattered, really, that someone that I had revered and looked up to and tried to be worthy of my inheritance was a scoundrel and really potentially a sex addict. I mean, his behavior was extreme. And I also found that so many things that I was told about the Mormon Church simply weren't true. And it was a layer upon layer of fact. And ultimately, at a certain point, I couldn't deny what I was seeing and reading, and I couldn't unsee it anymore. And I realized that I didn't believe in the church anymore. And I wanted to, it hurt my heart to leave my religion. And I didn't know what I was possibly going to tell my family or my friends or my community. But I couldn't pretend that I believed anymore. And ultimately, when I stopped going to church, the church came looking for me. They sent some people to check on me. And when they came knocking, I decided to tell the truth. And I told them I didn't believe, that I wasn't a Mormon anymore. And they were appalled. They knew who I was. And they ultimately begged me to come back, said I was being led astray by Satan, and threatened me with eternal damnation, and that they would tell my parents. And I knew they were going to be reporting me to my parents and to the other church authorities. So I had to tell my parents at that point. And of course, they were devastated. Uh, my mother said I broke her heart, and that now my family wouldn't be together in heaven, and
Ah,
that would be my fault, and that
wow.
um and she just begged me to reconsider, and to pray again, um and I basically said, well, I will. And so that she believed all the way to the end that someday I would return to the fold. Denial was a coping mechanism for my mother.
Hmm.
And I knew I couldn't stay in Utah. I would shame my family. I'd be an embarrassment to them. And my father had a high profile position as the director of the Historical Society, Mormon
Wow.
history.
Wow.
And so I left for New York City sight unseen. I didn't have a job or a place to stay. And you only do that when you're 19 and so naive, you don't know any better. But the contrast, obviously, between Salt Lake City and New York City, oh my goodness, it was culture shock. And but I wanted the anonymity of New York City, where no one knew who I was and I could reinvent myself. And
Hmm.
I thought it was going to be a simple process of just shedding my old skin like a snake does that's outgrown it, and emerge shiny and new. And that's not what happened. Uh, I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. I was very unrooted. I I didn't know the social norms of New York City.
Hmm.
So I literally didn't know how to behave. I didn't know what was acceptable, what was not. I knew how to live in a Mormon community, and that was the only bubble I had ever lived in, um, with Mormons, and um, going to church. I mean, Mormons are very insular. They keep the members engaged almost every night of the week with some activity at church, and they really discourage
Wow.
fraternizing with non-Mormons. And you certainly wouldn't date a non-Mormon. And in fact, non-Mormons were called Gentiles.
Oh, wow. Wow. Gosh.
And so here I was among the Gentiles, and it felt like Sodom and Gomorrah. I mean, I was like, wow, I didn't know what to believe. And I felt like, well, if the Mormon church isn't true, maybe the whole idea of God isn't true. Maybe that's just a myth as well. And I became an atheist in an attempt to try to find some confidence in I was only going to believe in things I could touch and feel, and that could be proven by science. But that wasn't very satisfactory. Uh, it left me with a lot of existential angst. I mean, what is the point of being on the planet? I mean, are we just a random experiment that happened in the universe? What am I doing here? Are there any rules at all, or does anything go? Is
Hmm.
there good and evil? So I was very lost. And of course, I didn't know any other ex-Mormons in New York City. So I felt very alone. And I entered into a really dark period in my life. Uh, and I was trying to outrun my past. And I was getting into drugs and alcohol, and I realized I was in a dangerous place,
Yeah.
and I had a moment of grace, really, where I realized that there was something bigger than me in the universe.
Mm.
That it was mysterious. I didn't know what it was, but I felt for the first time not alone, and that there was a power or a force or an energy, a creator. Um, and it wasn't the idea of my Mormon childhood definition of God, but it was something bigger than me. And that led me to begin a spiritual quest to discover not only what I believed, but who I was.
Mm.
And I I didn't know who I was. And
Yeah.
I had taken some psychology classes which talked about brainwashing and groupthink, and I was aware that I was held hostage by the belief system that I was born into, and that now that I had discarded it, I didn't know who I was or what anything was. And it felt like starting over, starting from scratch. And um, I I got into therapy, which was helpful and probably my saving grace, because it helped me understand the dysfunction of my family.
Mm.
Not the religious trauma so much, but the fact that um, I had made a vow never to end up in the powerless position I saw my mother in. The
Yeah.
Mormon Church is an extremely patriarchal organization. Men have the priesthood, that's the power to act in God's name. Women, their only role is to be a wife, a helpmate to their husband, and the mother of as many children as possible.
Oh,
And that's the only role that is respected or honored in the Mormon faith.
so
So
sad.
there are no women in leadership positions in the Mormon Church. Women don't open meetings with prayer. They they're really silent, um, and second class citizens.
Mm.
They have no say in any of the decisions that are made in the family. Um, I know my mother thought, I'd like to have 5 children, and my father wanted 10.
Oh my God.
Well, we ended up with 9. I've got 8 brothers and sisters. So you could see who was the boss in my family. And I started to piece together. My mother was terribly unhappy, as as my brothers and sisters also began to have questions. Decades after I left, a couple of my other siblings left the church as well.
Wow.
And that created a schism in our family, between the believers and the heretics. And it was very painful to be viewed as someone who lacked the tenacity or strength to live up to the rules of the Mormon faith. And that was why I left, because I didn't want to do the hard work of being righteous.
Mm.
Whereas I felt like it was the bravest thing I'd ever done, was to leave the faith. And yet I lost all respect for my family members, from my parents. They saw me as a sinner, and they were so disappointed in me. And that was really hard to live with. Um, but I started to, on my spiritual path, find out things that helped me get in touch with who I was. And one of those was learning to meditate. And one of those was taking yoga, because I was very disconnected from my body. In the Mormon Church, the purity culture is very strong, and it's a woman's responsibility to both attract a mate, but then deny him any access to her before marriage. And so it was kind of a contradictory position to be in. And men had no responsibility for making sure that sex before marriage didn't happen. It was always the woman's
Wow.
to say no.
Wow.
And I had experienced when I was 14, a worthiness interview where the bishop, who is like the pastor or leader of the congregation, interviewed me before I would be allowed to go into the temple.
Okay.
Now, Mormons have churches and then they have temples, and temples are where the sacred rituals, secret ceremonies take place.
Oh, no.
And at 14, you were allowed to go in and perform baptism by proxy for people who had died never learning about the Mormon gospel, so that they would have a chance to accept it on the other side. And I sat down in a room in the church all alone in his office, a man who was one of my girlfriend's fathers, and a much older man. And he started asking me a series of very invasive personal questions, like, did I have unclean thoughts? And
What?
and also, did I debase myself? I didn't even know what he was talking about.
Wow.
But I felt an overwhelming sense of being unclean, of shame. And I was afraid, even though I didn't understand the questions, that I was lying to him. And in lying to him, I was lying to God. But I wanted to go to the temple with my friends, and I didn't want to be humiliated by failing my worthiness interview. So I lied and said that I was worthy of going to the temple. And I didn't really realize how inappropriate. I didn't get in touch with my anger until years later, when I thought about how I would feel if a man asked my daughter at 14 those kinds of questions. And here she is, barely aware of her awakening sexuality, and to be shamed that way. And the expectation was that you could control having shameful thoughts, sexual thoughts. And I didn't, and that's the funny thing about cults and high demand. They expect a level of perfection that is unrealistic. And if you don't measure up, it's not that the requirements are unrealistic. It's that you're a bad person. And so I internalized a lot of that guilt and shame. And, it took years of unpacking all these messages, all the indoctrination, to sort through how it impacted me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for years, I was triggered. I could still get triggered
Mm.
today. And it's been decades since I've left the church. But, um, there's healing, and then there's peeling the onion, and then there's more healing. And then you realize there are wounds that are even deeper. You know, the idea of not being worthy to act in God's name, that there was no mother God, no mother in heaven, uh, told me, informed my idea of what a woman's worth was.
Mm.
And it wasn't much.
Mm.
And so unpacking that, I learned to recognize signs when I was acting in accordance to a belief system I no longer believed in. But it was so automatic. It was so knee jerk. It was so deeply indoctrinated in me that it felt sometimes pre-verbal,
Yeah.
just innate. Um, And I think that's what the harm is in high demand, high control religion or cults, is just how unprotected, how vulnerable you are, uh, and how difficult it is to deconstruct it and discover, well, is that really true? And do I really believe that? Has my experience shown me that that is true for me? So it's a long process.
Yeah. I just want to honor you. Like, I don't even know how to put it. Like, congratulations on taking your power back. It takes deep courage when you're in an environment that makes you think you're the problem, but actually you're not the problem. You're the awareness. Like, we say there's a black sheep in every family. You were like the black sheep, realizing that this is wrong. There's more to life than this. But because
Right.
everybody else has that conditioning, not just from this generation, it's generation back that is within
Four
them.
generations in my case of
Yeah.
devoted obedience. 4 generations. Yeah.
And it's deeply rooted. So even at birth, I think that's normal. And, even with yourself, the reason you had that deep shame and guilt, because your mothers and your grandmothers and their lineage had all this shame. So when you were born, you had that shame as well of theirs, which is why it's so
Right.
much harder. And, I'm the same. I totally understand. Like, I didn't grow up in a cult, but, I grew up in a religious environment. I grew up in Sikhism. But it was interesting because what I grew up with, women are supposed to be equal because it's a very young religion. But then the culture was doing the opposite. So I was so confused. It was saying respect women, but then people in my culture were not respecting women. And I was always confused growing up, right? And I had the shame as well,
Right.
like yourself, like, having these bad thoughts. I wasn't allowed to have these bad thoughts because they're wrong. And, I was made to feel guilt and
Right.
shame. And I had people watching me growing up. It was so sad. Like I grew up in a big city in the UK, but there was people that knew my family, and like if I went on a night out, they would then message my brother saying, "Oh, look, your sister's out tonight," and he'd be like, "Yeah, I know." Or somebody would see what I'm wearing and then try to shame me to my parents that I was wearing an
Right.
outfit that they thought I was inappropriate in. But it's like, who are you to tell me what to do with my life? But again,
Right.
I had this shame and guilt for the way I dressed, the way I act, the way I spoke. And it was deeply
Yeah.
rooted because it wasn't just me, it was generational within both my grandmother's sides. And
You're so right. It's legacy of shame
yes,
and guilt, generational legacy that's passed on. Yeah.
but it's not just family, it's not ancestral, it's cultural, and it's societal and patriarchy. And patriarchy is
Yeah.
the biggest thing. And patriarchy is in every religion. You're right about that. It's everywhere. But as women, like even I'm like, I know we're different generations, but even me growing up, like if I wore something, I was made to feel like I was a slut, even though I wasn't. Even I showed a bit of a leg, like it was made to feel like I was this bad person. Or if I was,
Right.
but you were just being free. And the thing is, the people that are trying to control you, they are trying to act like they are God. And that's the thing that nobody realizes. They are not God, because God is love. God is light. God wants you to be
Right.
yourself. God wants you to have thoughts. There's a reason why we have thoughts and thinkings and belief systems. But when we're
Right.
controlled into an environment, that's basically saying, I, as a human, want to have control over you so you cannot think for yourself and make decisions for yourselves. And that's what the Mormon Church was doing to you, was it was teaching you a woman must act and behave like this, and she must follow her man, not realizing that a man was made through a woman. Woman has
Yeah.
so much power and so much wisdom. We need to learn to respect women because, hey, without her, would those kids be there?
Yeah. Exactly. It's very, very contradictory. Uh, and unfortunately, most cults and high demand, high control religions are very, very patriarchally based and hierarchical. And there is no ability it's not allowed to question the leader or authority, and everyone who disagrees is viewed with suspicion. And there's a sense of being persecuted by outsiders, whether that's true or not. That's the sense that you can't trust anyone who's not within the group. Yeah, yeah. And no transparency, often financially. And what they do. And usually there's a financial component that I didn't recognize that I do now. And I think the Mormon Church is mostly a very successful business. I don't know if you're aware, but they're the second wealthiest
Wow.
Christian church after the Catholic Church.
Wow. But to be honest, every religion is a business. It doesn't matter what culture it is.
Right.
Every religion is a business. I've seen that now. And I've, but again, I didn't know this growing up, because we're so immersed into it. When we take a step back, we're like,
Right.
Something doesn't feel
Now,
right.
follow the money. The Mormon Church shocked when a whistleblower came forward and talked about the Mormon Church having a $200 billion
What?
Private equity fund. That means they're not being taxed on it.
What?
The second largest private equity fund in the world. And this was money that is being collected from tithing. And I don't know what you know about tithing in the Mormon Church, but all Mormons are expected to pay 10% of their income right off the top.
What? Into the
before
church?
taxes. And if you don't do that, you are considered a Mormon who's not in good standing, and you're not allowed in the temple to do all
What?
to make your
So God says that you need to earn money to come to God? What?
I know. And the message is so strong, that it's like, if you have to choose between paying your rent and paying your tithing, pay your tithing, because God will take care of you then,
Oh my God, that's insane. That is, I can't believe it. Wow.
And the whistleblower came forth and said, hey, I can't live with this. This money is not being used in charitable ways, but in fact to make more money and to prop up Mormon businesses and purchases. And it's still in court right now, but this really angered me when I realized, here they are, by being designated a religion, they don't have to disclose any kind of be held accountable in any kind of financial capacity, and disclose anything. And the money is not being used for good in the world. So I'm very cynical about the Mormon Church. They spend millions of dollars on PR, presenting themselves as a wholesome, family oriented, community oriented religion. But, I want to say, yeah, well, where are the people of color? It's all white middle
Mm,
class Mormons. And where are your transgender kids or your,
yeah.
the whole LBGT community are considered sinners,
Yeah. Wow.
and they don't talk about the high suicide rate of the LGB community in Utah, where these poor kids who
Oh.
didn't ask to be born gay to a Mormon family,
Oh.
kill themselves because they just don't understand that there's a place in this world for
Mm,
them.
that's
It's terribly
horrible.
sad.
It's
And
horrible.
Utah has the highest antidepressant rate use in the country. More
Wow.
Mormon women use antidepressants than any other state. And that doesn't surprise me because Mormon women have got to be so frustrated
Mm,
that eventually, and they internalize, they can't recognize their anger at the position they're in
yeah.
with no options, few choices available to them, no autonomy, and no ability to govern themselves. Um, and so they think, well, there's something wrong with me. I'm supposed to be happy. I'm supposed to be fulfilled with this
Mm.
role of being a mother, and I'm not happy.
Oh,
And so there's something wrong with me.
wow. That's so sad. And the thing is, it's not that there's something wrong with them, it's the environment that's wrong for them. And that
Yes,
God is, or universe, whatever you want to call it, is saying to them that this is not what you're here to be. You are something
right,
greater than this. You have a voice, raise your opinion, speak your truth. I gave you a voice for a
right.
reason. I didn't suppress you. And when we feel depressed, it's because we're not meeting ourselves, not being true to ourselves. We're sacrificing ourselves. And I see it not just within the Mormon community. I see it within South Asian community. I see it in all areas. Like with my clients, I see in all different backgrounds around the world. Um, and I grew up in an Indian environment, and we have some similar values where you people please, you sacrifice, you're the good girl, you don't raise your voice, you get
Right.
educated, but again, don't go too
You're
far
of
to.
service to others. Hmm.
Yes, yes. And I grew up with the religion as well as being of service, but I didn't know the limit of being of service. So I never really understood the context of it, that there's a limitation. I was a friend that would be on the phone till 3 a.m. in the morning, helping friends with their problems and issues, always giving and burning myself out. But also my
Right.
culture confused me because I had to be smart and educated, but then I meant to not have a voice. It was so confusing. And as women,
Yeah.
no wonder we're getting confused with the things that we were raised with, these cultural, like religious beliefs, society beliefs, because our soul is saying to us that it's wrong for us. We need to really come back to who we are, what we were created on
Right.
and designed to be. And the fact that the women in the Mormon church are shaming themselves, and that's what that group of people want to do. They don't want to take, especially men, accountability for their actions. They want to blame the women, that they're the problem, not realizing they're created the
Right.
unhappiness. And actually they are not here to be controlled or manipulated. They're here to have a higher connection with the universe. And that doesn't mean just being a baby making machine. It means having creativity, doing something that they're here to do, sharing their gifts and their powers.
Yes, and that they're unique individuals
Yes.
with choices and options, and that they're not just, um, round pegs going into round holes. I mean, there is distinctions among them, and women in Utah often finish college, even though they do tend to get married at a very young age. But then they're supposed to just pivot and give up everything that they learned. I mean, what was the point of getting educated if you're going to be a stay-at-home mother and your job is to have a baby every year.
It's to look good for society. It's the same in Indian culture in India. So I'm born in the UK, but when I look at Indian culture in India, there are so many educated women, amazing degrees, like engineers, like creating amazing things. And the moment some of them get married off, their mother-in-laws will then be like, or the family, oh, she can't work, she has to look after the family. Like his family should not really be her family, it should be extended now because they're a unit together.
Right.
But she must take care of them, their needs, their behaviors. And suddenly this educated, smart woman has now gone back like into patriarchy and doesn't know
Right.
her worth anymore and has given her power away. And I've always said this to people around me, like, why educate your daughter if you're going to bring her down? What is the point of doing
Right.
that if you're going to raise her up to have beliefs and hope to then chuck it all down just to prove to society she's got a
Right.
degree and it can go on the wall and then she's here to be a housewife? That's horrible. Imagine a woman doing that to a man. They wouldn't sit for that.
No, exactly. And Utah is a extremely sexist place, which is one of the reasons I left.
Yeah.
Women and men. I mean, women have internalized the sexism of the Mormon culture. And if you ask them questions, like they did a survey and they said, would a woman be as good of a president as a man? And the women, as
No.
well as the men, said, no, a man would be better in that job.
Oh my God. Talk about the deep level of manipulation. Wow.
Exactly.
Sounds like
And
narcissism.
yeah, it's frustrating. And for me, it was frustrating to watch my younger brothers and sisters make choices that I knew were limiting them so much. My little sister, went off to college. Her first semester, she met a young man. They got engaged. She married before she was 19. And then it was a baby, every year.
Wow.
And
Wow.
it's just, it's just really, it was really, really hard for me to just shut up and not say anything. But I didn't want my parents angry with me. Our relationship was so fragile anyway. I was largely estranged and not considered part of the family, that I didn't want to be accused of trying to lead my younger brothers and sisters astray.
Yeah.
So, and I didn't get to go to most of my brothers and sisters' weddings because they were held in the temple. So I would wait outside the temple while everybody went into the ceremony but me, and then be there for the pictures afterwards, and they didn't understand why that hurt my feelings. They were like, well, you're not a Mormon, so why would you want to go? And I'm like, well, weddings are usually vows you make in front of your family. They're inclusive affairs, but they didn't understand. And, when you start to see things differently, it makes communication really challenging because you know where they're coming from, but you see how limited that belief system is. And yet there's no way to enlarge the way they see the world.
I think the problem is when you stay in the same town or the same city around the same people, you don't grow. And when you leave, that's when you start to question your values. And I did the same when I went to university. I had like this view about everything was perfect, my family, my culture, everything was perfect. And then I went to university and I was like, whoa, that's not right. That's not right. Then I'd be dating people and going, oh, that's not right. Oh, their family are like this. Oh, their culture's like, and I started to question things. And when I would ask questions, I was shunned about it. Or I had, like yourself, this deep guilt and shame, which obviously we know now is generational. So even when I did question it, I still had shame about it. But it was only when I started to do the inner work in 2012 that I realized that a lot of it was control and manipulation. And actually, a lot of it we have just taken on board as our truth. But, what you learn from 0 to 13 is what you become. So obviously it's natural that, you'd feel this shame for a long time. I would feel that shame for a long time. It would take us a long time to unpack these things because that is what we knew. But then when we're in new environments, then we start to understand ourselves. Then we unpack everything. But then when we go home to the environments that haven't moved on, we are the problem.
Right.
We are the issue,
Right.
but not realizing they've not had that experience that we've had to understand that some of these patterns are not right, or these manipulation things are tools to hold us back. But again, we can't
Right.
save or fix them. And that's the hardest point, is we have to let them figure that out for themselves, whether they do in this lifetime or not. But what we have to do is be true to ourselves and what the universe, God, wants. But also, I feel like you were chosen for a reason to break the pact, right? You are part of the history of somebody that created this, the Mormon culture, right? There had to
Right.
be
And
somebody that had to break it, especially as a woman, to shift that change within the family, you know.
right. And my nephews and nieces now, some of them have left the church, and that has left their Mormon parents very upset. And they've reached out to me
Mm.
uh, and said, "How do I do this?" So uh, it's been really lovely to see that my nieces and nephews that have left the church see me as someone that is trustworthy. And they've admitted to me, we shunned you, when we were growing up, because that's kind of the attitude our parents had towards you.
Yeah. But
And yeah,
I was just going to say, it's interesting because it's usually the parent, or well, no, the aunt or uncle we're distanced from growing up. We don't understand why, but as we get older, then we understand and go, actually, now we get why they kept
yeah,
themselves
they weren't
away.
part of. Uh-huh.
The dysfunction. Yeah. Wow, we are coming towards the end of the show. God, that's gone really quick. I've just got a few questions for you.
Mhm.
What are your 5 top tips for someone who's just left the cult? Like, what do they do next? Because obviously it's quite hard when you leave. What are your 5 top tips for them?
I would say the most important thing is to get some support so that you can absorb the impact of this huge shift in your life, and have someone with a skill set that can help you unpack what this all means on a personal basis. And therapy, particularly with a religious or a cult trauma-based therapist, would be excellent. Find a support community, other people in your same shoes, other people who have left the cult or left religion, so that you don't feel so alone. And they act as sort of a buffer or a second family, because often you've given up yours in your decision to leave. The other thing is that I found helpful is pay attention to that voice in your head that most people would talk about as your inner critic. The voice in your head that is always, that says things like, well, you shouldn't feel that way, or uh, that's not a good idea, or that's selfish. Pay attention to that inner critic, and keep asking yourself, where is that coming from? Because often it's the voice of the cult, of the religion, and you've internalized it. So it now sounds like you talking to yourself. But in reality, ask yourself, what's the origin of this idea, or this, what does it remind me of? And that's sometimes helpful. Um, Personally, I found meditation very helpful, because it's a process of watching your thoughts and becoming more aware that you are not your thoughts, that there is an observer who, that is your true self or your pure self, that is seeing the thoughts, and you realize that the thoughts are not all powerful. And that gives you some freedom from the triggers and the knee-jerk reactions you have to events and words. Journaling is often very helpful for the same reason. You start to see patterns, and especially the kind of free-form stream of consciousness writing encouraged by the Morning Pages, Julia Cameron's Artist Way
Yes.
workshop talks about, where you just write every morning 3 pages, whatever you want, whatever comes out first thing in the morning before you do anything. And I think getting back in your body somehow, it was the path for me was yoga, where because I was disassociated with my body. My body was the enemy. And I had to make friends with it again and learn to listen to it and honor what it was telling me and treat it with respect and kindness, and not see it as something to be battled or disassociated from.
I love
Those
that.
those are some of the things that I found were really helpful. But I'd say the most important are the first two.
Yeah. I love the bit
Getting
about, sorry,
skilled therapy with people specializing in this, and finding a support community.
yeah, 100%. And I love the bit about the body. I think a lot of people don't realize like you can heal the mind, you can heal the spiritual side, but the physical body stores energy and emotions, especially in our hips as women, and we need to release that trauma. And the body recognizes energy as well. So say, for example, you're not in a safe environment, your body's going to feel that. Like I had fibromyalgia, and that's because I was in the wrong environment. And the moment I left, it went.
Amazing, isn't it? Our bodies are trying to talk to us all the time.
And they know before our mind does, right? Our body always knows before our
Right.
mind does. So we need to listen. And, if you're feeling anxiety or anything when you're around somebody, just pay attention to that, because it's trying to tell you something that might not be the
It's
best
information. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and what are you most grateful for?
I think I'm most grateful for the fact that I was blessed with curiosity, a deep curiosity, because I think curiosity is what in the end saved me. I feel like I was curious about the larger world. I was curious what my professor had read about the Mormons, and I was curious to find the truth. And curiosity is the enemy of the cult, because it opens the window to truth.
And that's the truth of God, if you think about it.
Yeah.
So what they teach you is not truth of God, that's man-made. Because
Yeah.
God gave you curiosity, God gave you wisdom, God gave you intuition for a reason to trust it. And when we don't trust it, that's when we feel, like we're saying in our body, depressed or anxious, because we're not being true to that. And
Yes.
so when a cult or a religion that's manipulating you makes you feel bad, the question is it really me, or is it the environment that I'm in?
Yeah. And I'm incredibly grateful that I have had a second chance at living my life, because my life now is really quite wonderful. And my marriage and my children are very fulfilling for me, and my work with other survivors. These are the kinds of things that really give you a sense of purpose and meaning in your life.
Thank you, Lynn, for just being on the show, being honest, and just being a powerhouse for other women out there.
Thank you for having me. Like I said, I so respect the work that you do in helping others heal. It's such important work and so necessary, and being an advocate for this.
Well, thank you. And, I'm just proud of you that you left. You had that courage, and, it is about courage to say enough is enough. I'm ready to live my truth. And here you are helping so many other women and other people just heal from within. So I'm so proud of you, and thank you for just trusting yourself.
Thank you. That means a lot coming from you.
Oh, bless you. Honestly, what an amazing episode with Lyn Smith Gregory. It takes so much courage, so much courage to leave a toxic environment, let alone a toxic relationship. And, you know, a lot of women who are smart and educated are ending up in these situations, and it's not because they're not smart, it's because it's a generational pattern that's been handed down from one generation to another. Just like what Lyn grew up, she was taught one way of being a Mormon and how Mormon families are run, to then finding out the truth of what happened within her lineage that went back to her great uncle. And it just shows that when we do the work, when we go within, we can heal not just ourselves, but generations before us that have been in these toxic cycles. And we have a choice in this lifetime to heal it and come back home to ourselves, so the new generation lives in a more peaceful, safe and loving environment. Unfortunately, that's the end of the show. Before I leave, I want to leave you with this quote. You cannot heal in the same place where you got sick. That's a quote by ourmindfullife.com. Now, if you want to transform trauma and learn to trust yourself so you can powerfully move forward in your life, visit my coaching program at www.gerdshundle.com, where I share my tips in how to really come back into your own power, speak your truth, and finally hold the boundaries in your life that you deserve. For more information about the show, visit www.gerdshundle.com. And remember, stay happy, stay healthy, stay lit.